Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 9th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to talk about some stakes racing at Oaklawn Park. We're going to highlight the late pick four there, races 9 through 12, which includes the Oaklawn Mile for older horses and the Oaklawn Stakes going 9 furlongs for the 3-year-olds. And we'll close things out at Gulfstream Park with a couple of pretty interesting allowance races from that venue. Craig, it's good to have some stakes racing to talk about this weekend, and this card at Oaklawn actually came up pretty strong.
Yeah, it's quite the doozy. If you like 12 horse or more fields, it is definitely the card for you. I don't mind big fields, of course, as most gamblers don't, but you certainly got to put your work in on this one.
For sure. And we're going to start there with that Oaklawn Mile. It's race 9, the first leg of that late pick 4 sequence. As you said, the card is great all day and doesn't stop in this late pick 4 sequence because we've got pretty much full fields for the entire 4 races. And it begins with this 14 horse field in the Oaklawn Mile with that short stretch run. Will be interesting to see how the trips work out in this race. But we've got 3 top older horses in this race coming back, all making their 2020 debuts. Tom's d'Etat, I think, is going to be a prohibitive favorite in this race. I think I saw he's listed at 3-1 in the morning line. I would think he'll go off even shorter than that. He's a horse that got really good in the second half of last season, picking up that grade 1 victory in the Clark. I think the real question with Tom's d'Etat is the turn back to a mile.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that myself, and his PPs don't really seem to be, it doesn't seem to be a problem. He's got lots of good races at a 1:70, mile and a 16th. I would question if this was really a target for him. I think he was pointed to the New Orleans handicap earlier in the year, and something obviously happened that he didn't make that race. So, I'll have to read up and see what the plan is, but I'm with you. I do think he is clearly the horse to beat. He's got the best figures in the race, the best form coming in. And if you could get that 3-1, like I like to say, take it now because you're not going to get it on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading some quotes from Al Stahl who was saying the big goal this season is obviously the Breeders' Cup Classic. This is just a starting point. I mean, obviously they'd like to win this race, as you'd like to win every race, but this is not the end goal. I think the real question with him, aside from the mile distance, is how the pace of this race is going to shape up, because I'm looking at the pace projector, and he's the number 3 horse projected to be all the way back in mid-pack in this race. He can come from a little bit farther off the pace. He's typically a horse that's, just behind that first flight of runners. But it is going to be a contest into that first turn because there is a bit of speed in this race. I mean, you've got that horse Home Run Trick towards the center of the pack. He's a need the lead type, so he's going to be going. Slick Silver from the rail, same situation. They're not quite good enough to win this race, but they're going to ensure that they're moving up front. And maybe that sets it up for a closer. I also wonder how that's going to impact a horse like the number 2, Mr. Money, because he's one that really does seem to do his best running when he's up close to the pace.
He does. It's a race where the pace projector has it labeled as fast. Not really a surprise in a big field like this. And I think it's legit given those clear front runners you pointed out. The interesting angle for me in this race is the returning 3-year-olds. We got a lot of big names in here, and Mr. Money, who went on a tear before tailing off a little bit towards the end of the year. We have Improbable, who's almost sure to take money, even though he draws the far outside post. He always gets bet. I don't remember if he was I don't think he was the favorite in the dirt mile, but he certainly took some money in that race. We have with Long Range Toddy, who actually beat him in a division of the Rebel. So it's definitely an interesting field trying to tackle a horse like Tom's d'Etat. At that short price we talked about with Tom's d'Etat and given the pace setup, I'm going to take a shot probably, depending on the odds, of course, but with number 8 Bankit, a horse I keep seeming to fall on. I know I picked him last time out and when he ran at Oaklawn in the Essex Handicap, but that was a day where there was just absolutely no pace. He had nothing to run into. He was up way too close. And I'm just putting a line through that one. I like that this race is actually a little bit short. I am concerned given the incredibly long losing streak Steve Asmussen's on at Oaklawn. But when I look kind of deeper into that, his horses aren't really running that bad. I mean, sure, some of them did, but a lot of them have improved their speed figures. He's got a lot of seconds and thirds. So while it is something I'm going to follow, it's also something that I think is just more just a strange coincidence than any real just falling apart of the Asmussen barn. I've got way too much respect for him for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the entire conversation about that losing streak has gotten pretty silly. I mean, I know he's lost with, 43 starters in a row at Oaklawn. If you actually look up in Formulator what the time range that took place over, he hasn't won in 5 race cards. Those 43 starters are just 5 race days. So it's basically he hasn't won in a week. It's not some big disaster. And as you said, the horses have run well. And if you look through that sample, it's not like he started that many short prices. I only counted a couple of horses that went off at odds under 2-1. So even that's a bit of a statistical anomaly for Steve Asmussen to not start any horses that are really short prices at Oaklawn. So I just think it's the way that it's worked out. And every once in a while, when you start as many horses as Asmussen does, you're going to have hot streaks and cold streaks, and it's going to turn around pretty soon. I wouldn't get too caught up in that. Bankett's a horse that I wanted to talk about a little bit as well. I don't know if I'd go so far as to make him a top pick in this race, because it is a difficult spot for a horse like Bankett, who maybe isn't quite fast enough to win. But I did highlight his last trip in my horses to watch segment that I do for all the reasons that you mentioned. He was against the pace that day, got shuffled back early, had to make a wide run. It didn't seem like the track was those kinds of running styles that day over that sloppy surface. He's not a horse that likes a sloppy track anyway. He's much better on fast going. So we'll see how the track comes up on Saturday at Oaklawn, because there's a bit of rain in the forecast later in the day. It's unclear if that's going to come before the race day is over. But I do think he's going to get pace to close into. So of the long shots, Bankett is definitely the one I would focus on. I'm going to go to Improbable again. I know that I've fallen for this horse probably too many times at this point, but I do think that the 1 mile distance is really ideal for Improbable. Going those longer trips as a 3-year-old really just didn't work out for him in the Derby and the Preakness. As we talked about in the aftermath of the Pennsylvania Derby, that was a race that he really should have won. Things just went wrong that day. He acted up in the gate, which he does have a tendency to do sometimes. But also the trip didn't work out at all that day, as he was in traffic in the stretch. And then in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile last time, he didn't run well, but that was that weird, slow track at Santa Anita that Mr. Money didn't handle either. So I don't want to put too much stock in that race. And I know the outside post is detrimental, but maybe it's actually good for a horse that sometimes has gait issues, that he doesn't have to stand on the gate that long. So I'm going to take a shot with Improbable. I don't think he's going to be a big price. He's probably going to be the second choice to Tom's d'Etat. I just thought he was the biggest rival for that horse, and I'll use Bankett sort of in exotics wagers.
Yeah, that kind of brings up an interesting question. Bankett, he's not the horse I think is the most likely winner. He's just a horse that I think at the odds I would probably bet. I wanted to ask you, do you establish like a line you're willing to accept before these races, or play it by ear? Because personally, I used to make a line for almost every horse I thought would have a chance, and was pretty strict with that. And I kind of got away from it when the odds got so crazy late, so many late odds changes, that it was really tough to use it with any confidence. But given the new tool in DRF, which I think has been pretty good at predicting what the odds are going to be, I'm wondering if it's something I should go back to just for a little more discipline when it comes to wagering. But I'm curious how you go about that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I go so far as to write down like a value line as some people do, because I mean, I just don't have the time to do that. But I do typically have some kind of number in my head, especially when I'm picking a long shot of, what's the minimum value, what's the minimum price that I think is still value on this horse. And I mean, a horse like Bankett is 15-1 on the morning line. I would want a double-digit price on a horse like that. I wouldn't want to be betting Bankett at 8-1 in this race. I don't think he's going to be 8-1, but he's the kind of horse that should be at price as long as the field holds it together and there are not significant scratches, because you do have to acknowledge that Mr. Money, Tom's d'Etat, and Improbable are really all more likely winners than Bankett is. So you want to get a price on a horse like that. And for me, I never pay that much attention to the win betting before, it's a few minutes to post. I always look at what the horse's prices are in doubles. And now you don't have to do all of that work yourself, because you can use that projected odds tool, which you can find in Formulator. And you can also find now in new DRF mobile PPs. It's going to be added there as well, I think, if it isn't already this week. So all of that, I think you can look at before the race to get a sense of what price a horse is going to be. And I definitely would want to demand value on horses that are have the look of Bankett in a race that's as tough as this one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. If Bankett's a horse that somehow goes off 8-1, it's a horse I wouldn't be interested in. The other horse I did want to mention in here is Kershaw. He actually ran a pretty big figure winning last time out at Santa Anita. He got a 120. I think it was a 117. It shows in my PPs as a 120 because of I guess it's a weight adjustment. I do use the weight setting, but I wanted to note that was a race that I broke out from the others on the card. You can see it in our box with the race ratings. It has a B, and unfortunately, given with the state of racing in the country, I think there's only been one run back from that race, and it was a horse that ran back on a synthetic surface. So there's really not a whole lot to go on with Kershaw, and he's a long shot. So maybe I'll throw him on my tickets lately as like a C-type horse just based on that figure, but it's not one that I would be elevating him to strong contender off of just because it was a tough figure to make.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to knock him too much because I think he's going to be a big price in this race. But he is a horse that's accomplished all of his victories, and really the only times that he's run well are when he has a clear lead. And that just seems really unlikely here, given the other speed in this race. So even if the fig is correct, maybe the trip just doesn't work out for him this day. The one other thing I want to add about the discussion we were just having about value is, people sometimes only talk about value in relation to long shots, but I mean, you could have a value line for even the shorter prices in a race. I mean, there's a situation where Tom's Day Talk could be value in this race if you think he's supposed to be 8-5 and he goes off at 5-2. I mean, that's a situation where we're supposed to bet the favorite because he's not being supported at the rate that you think he actually is likely to win the race. So just, don't only think about value with relation to long shots, because there are situations where you should be betting shorter prices if they're bigger prices than you think that they should be.
Oh, there's no doubt about that in my mind. If Tom's the Top went off at 5-2, I would be all over him. I don't think that's going to happen, but we've seen enough examples just since we've been doing this podcast where we've been surprised by the wagering. So you just never know. If you're playing live, you got to be on your toes.
So I think that this pick 4 sequence just continues to get tougher and tougher from here, because the first race looked pretty straightforward to me. This next race, this maiden race going a mile and a 16th as the 10th at Oaklawn for the 3-year-olds. Actually, I think 3-year-olds. No, just 3-year-olds. This is a pretty tough one. It's hard to even know where to start in this race. I didn't look at the morning line that closely. I think the number 10, Dean Martini, is the morning line favorite. I mean, I guess Brad Cox is always dangerous. This horse has been right there in a few starts recently, both on dirt and turf. But I mean, to me, this would be a spread race.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I was like you. I didn't know where to start, so I just kind of looked through the different horses to see who had run the best figure last time out. And that was actually the 4-horse What a Country with a 104. But, I mean, even that one's a figure. I'm not saying it's a wrong figure, but he was 13 lengths behind Blackberry Wine. It looks like more of a kind of suck-up figure where everybody who was chasing back Blackberry Wine just backed up. He wasn't actually supported very much at the windows. He's got low percentage connection. So he's 8-1 on the morning line. If he drifted to 10 or 12-1, yeah, I'd bet that 104 that he was going to repeat it. But he's not a horse I'm going to be super enthused about. But looking through the field, I mean, even the favorite that you mentioned, he doesn't have very good figures. I think that's strictly a Brad Cox thing. He has a look of a horse we talked about with him on last week's podcast, of a horse who just is a professional maiden. Lots of seconds and thirds. He doesn't win. He gets beat at short prices. So, it's hard to be too excited about him. If I were going to take a shot with a few prices in here, I do like Eddie Forever. He's a bit interesting to me. He moves out of the Bob Baffert barn, but he does go to Robertino Diodoro. So that's not the usual huge negative you assume with a horse leaving Bob Baffert's barn. I think he's a horse who's probably better on dirt than turf. But if you look through his charts, his last race on turf was actually pretty good, and it's proven to be a very, very strong maiden race. And you can even say the same about his dirt race 2 back, where I think he's better. It's a lot of winners have come out of that race. So he's one I'm interested in. I mean, he's not a huge price on the morning line. He's 9-2. One that is a big price that interests me a little bit is Hugo, the number 6 horse. He's a horse that's strictly a trainer play for me. His trainer does better second time out than first. I saw that in their TimeformUS PPs, and then when I looked them up in Formulator, it's a move where he does have a positive ROI in maiden special weight races. It's not a huge sample. He didn't his stretch out numbers aren't as good, but he had one winner from, I think it was 9, but it was still enough to have a positive ROI. So it must have been a big price winner. I didn't look that sharp, but those are a couple prices in a field that, like you, I think is just wide open.
Yeah. I feel the same way as you about the horses coming out of that Blackberry wine race. I think saying that they were suck up seconds and thirds, that's an accurate way to put it. They didn't do a whole lot of running, especially the third place finisher. I mean, he lost by 20 lengths. And sometimes we say this about turf races where horses can sort of get dragged into running a faster figure. I think it's sometimes the case when you've got these gigantic margins that horses win by on the dirt. Not that the figure for Blackberry Wine is wrong, and he's running earlier on the card, so we'll get a bit of a read on him. I just want to see that the rest of the field is quite as strong as the winner was. It's almost as if they were in 2 different races. I've got no problem with a horse like Eddie Forever. Interesting that I think he was a private purchase away from Bob Baffert and the Don Alberto Corporation for the new connections. I mean, Robertino Diodoro can certainly win off a trainer change from anybody, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. I'm not going to knock your price horse Ugo. He's a little bit interesting for the reasons that you mentioned. I'd probably use him sort of as maybe like a B or a C in multi-race wagers. Some horses that interested me quite a bit in this race. One of them is the number 8 Urbanite. This is a horse that made his debut sprinting on the dirt at Churchill Downs last year behind Mr. Monomoy. I thought he ran pretty well that day. He was sort of hard ridden early to stay in the race, just didn't look like he had a lot of speed. But I thought he was staying on really well in the late stages of that race, kind of running like a horse that should appreciate more ground. For whatever reason, they tried to stretch him out on turf in his next race. I don't really get that because he doesn't have a turf pedigree. They're just getting back to the right surface, I think. And he showed enough promise in that debut that I could see him taking a step forward now, stretching out on the dirt. He's got plenty of dirt route pedigree on the dam side. The dam is by Bernardini. The dam is out of this mare Urbane, who was, I think, a grade 1 winner going, I think, as far as 1.25 miles back in the 90s. So I just think that horse has a right to really improve getting into a dirt route. And the other horse that I have just a thing for that probably is a bit of a trap is the number 12 Hunt the Front. This is a horse that I've kind of been waiting to kind of have the light bulb go on with him because he showed a lot of promise in his debut at Aqueduct back in November of last year. He ran really well that day to be third over a speed favoring racetrack, closing behind Toledo, who looked promising at the time. He's gone 2 turns now 3 times since then, once at Churchill, 2 times at Oaklawn. He just is this goofy horse that doesn't start that well. He's got ability, but he runs in spots. If he ever figures it out and can run an entire race and have his head in the game, I think he's going to be okay. We'll just see if this is the day that he does it. But he's a horse that I definitely wouldn't want to let beat me.
Yeah, and a horse like him, I don't think the 12 post is really going to matter much because he looks like one who's just going to drop back and make a run. And it's not that short stretch mile race that they run at Oaklawn. It is the mile and a 16th, so it would give him a little more time.
Let's move on to the Oaklawn Stakes, going the 1 1/8 distance for the 3-year-olds. And this is another full field, nearly a full field. We've got 13 going. Pretty wide open race. I guess that the number 4,000 Words will be among the favorites. He's the favorite on the morning line. 1,000 Words has some of the highest speed figures in the race, no doubt, coming out of that strong performance in the Los Alamitos Futurity and that workmanlike win in the Robert B. Lewis. His effort in the San Felipe last time, though, it bothers me because he took a step in the wrong direction. He was just really dull that day. It's not like he got a poor trip or anything. He just was no match for horses like Authentic and Honor AP. And I guess it's somewhat of a good sign that Bob Baffert's not, pressing the brakes or anything. He's continuing on with this horse, maybe setting the sights a little bit lower. But he's not one that I totally trust at a short price.
No, we're on the same page here. I think he is the horse to beat based on a couple of his wins earlier in the year, but I don't want a short price off of that effort. I went back and watched the replay probably 3 times trying to figure out any kind of excuse I could come up with for him. And there just wasn't one. It just was a dull effort. And it's not one, I don't mind looking for a rebound on a horse off a bad effort, but not one or so in a big field. So he's not one that I'm interested in, and I'm willing to take a shot against. As you said, it is a big field, 13 horses. The pace projector does have it labeled fast. I do think there are some legit speeds in here, so I don't have any problem with that. The first horse I actually gravitated to was Farmington Road. I was a little disappointed when I saw the morning line of only 6-1. He just had the look of a horse who might be a bigger price, and that was mostly based on his trip in the Risen Star, where he was just wide on both turns. The pace wasn't hot, and he was still actually running late. So he is a horse I do like in here. It's just going to come down the price for me. And the other horse I was drawn to a little bit was Basin. I don't think his Rebel was great or anything, but it was his first start off of a long layoff, and I thought he ran okay. He had a little trouble. He did get a setup, but with the pace, but it was behind Nadal, who's arguably the leader of the 3-year-old division right now, based on that effort. If not, it's tis the law, but it's probably close on most people's minds. So Basin, I think he's going to run better second off the layoff. He has a good post position. He doesn't need to be up on the lead, but he does have good tactical speed. So those are the two that caught my eye.
Yeah, we see this race pretty similarly. I like Basin quite a bit in this race. The rail post position seems fine for him in this large field, and I really liked his Rebel performance. That was a strong race with Nadal winning in pretty, in reasonably fast time when you consider pace. And Basin was hustled in the early going to be relatively close to that pace. I mean, at the first call, he was just 2 lengths off the leaders, and they sort of backed off a little bit on the backstretch. And then when he started to make his move on the far turn, that was the time when the race was falling apart. That's when Accession made that big move up into the race on the inside. And Basin sort of had to pause briefly, got caught in behind that horse, American Theorem, that was fading at the altar course, just lost momentum. And I thought he was pretty game in the stretch to battle back and get third, because at the quarter pole, it looked like he was going to get nothing. And it proved to me that the 2 turns is really going to be no problem for Basin. That's not surprising because he's by Liam's map. And if we've seen anything from the Liam's maps, it's that they really do want to go longer. If you look at his stats in the DRF Sire stats and Formulator, I think he wins with nearly 30% of his dirt route starters. So that's really strong, especially for a new sire. So I don't think Basin's going to have trouble with the 1 1/8 distance here. And let's remember, Basin was a really good 2-year-old. I mean, I know that Hopeful was run over a sloppy track, but he looked good that day. And I'm not going to be shocked if he takes a step forward second off the layoff. So he'd be my top pick in this race. I have no problem with Farmington Road either. I think, as you said, it kind of, you want to base your opinion on him, dependent on the price, because you do want to get a bit of price on a horse that hasn't really proven himself against stakes company yet, though he did run well in the Risen Star last time. So I'd use those two, I guess, as the main alternatives to 1,000 Words. I mean, of the logical horses. If I was going to shop for a bigger price in this race, the one that would interest me the most of those horses that are going to be in the double-digit odds range is the number 11 Background. He's coming out of an allowance race last time where he finished behind Tyshawn, who's also in this race. I just didn't think Background got the greatest trip that day because he actually reared up at the start and was off a bit slowly, had to be a little farther back in the early going than Tyler Bays probably wanted him to be. He had to advance wide on the far turn to make that move up to in contention at the quarter pole. That was a day that was maybe a little bit speed favoring over that sloppy track, and he stayed on well enough at the end. Just feel like he's a horse we haven't seen the best of yet, and maybe he can be one that takes another step forward here.
Yeah, he was actually the next horse I was going to mention. He comes out of that race with Tyshawn, who's actually in here as well. I just see that one getting a much tougher trip. He did run a 1:15 winning that day. It was also on Rebel Day. So same as a lot of these other horses. So he certainly ran a fast race, but I'm with you. Think he had everything his own way that day. And of those two, I would prefer Background to him.
Yeah, I mean, there are others we could talk about. I don't have a really positive take on anybody else in this field. I think there are a lot of horses that some people might consider that I don't think really want to go this 1 1/8 distance, horses like Shoplifted and Digital. So I was going to focus mostly on the horses that we just mentioned.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, Gold Street's in here who won the Smarty Jones, but I think that was a fluke. He ran terrible in the Southwest. Shoplifted, who you mentioned, who I think was actually second the Basin in the Hopeful, and he just hasn't been as good. He came out, won the Springboard Mile here at my local track at Remington, but he's just kind of been the same. He hasn't really moved forward as a 3-year-old. So, yeah, I'm with you. We're pretty much on the same horses in this one.
Things don't end on an easy note in the finale at Oaklawn. It's a mile and a 16th, an optional claiming with some other conditions in here. Another large field, 12 horses, 2 on the also eligible list. And this is another one where it's hard to know where to start because there's no clear favorite. I mean, this, I think, is going to be another spread race for us. I guess I'll start with this one. I don't know. I just wanted to shop for some prices in this race because, I mean, I could talk about the virtues of the horses that are going to be vying for favoritism. To me, their merits are pretty obvious. So the things that I noticed about this race right off the bat is that there's not that much pace signed on. I mean, the number 3, Hunk of Burning Love, I think the pace projector is right. He does look faster than most of the others in this race. His main pace competition is the number 12, Emmys, who's drawn all the way on the outside. That's not ideal for him, so he'd really have to be hustled to get to the front here. And I think that could benefit Hunk of Burning Love. He's 15-1 in the morning line, and I just think he's going to be tough to reel in this race because he actually ran pretty well last time on March 19th in that race at the same level. That was a race where he was running against that horse whose name is escaping me now, who's running the Oaklawn Mile, the speed of that race, Home Run Trick. And he was battling with that horse early. Actually, Home Run Trick outran him to the first turn. Hunk of Burning Love had to steady, come around that horse, battle him for the lead, actually put him away in the stretch and just got run down by the closers. That was a good effort. And I think if he repeats that kind of effort with a little bit less pace, he's going to be tough to run down. So I know he's a price horse, but he's kind of the one that I want to start with because I think he's going to be the target.
Yeah, we're definitely on the same page with him. I love that he's shown on a lone lead. And like you said, I think he's going to get it. If you look at the 12 horse who you mentioned, there's a lot of turf speed that's putting him forward on the pace projector, which just isn't the same. When he led in a dirt race, it was with a slow pace. So I do think he's going to have things his own way. We did kind of look at this the same way. I'm not going to go through all the horses in here. I just kind of picked out a few that I was interested in. The number 8, Charlie's Archangel, is a horse who has just been ultra consistent. TimeformUS Charge has won at Delta, came to Oaklawn, has repeated his figures that he was running at other places. He's run well at Churchill. He has good tactical speed. So he's one I think fits well in here, and he does have a 10-1 morning line. And the other that caught my eye was the 9 horse Casanova for Brad Cox. He's a horse who came back. He had a good return race. He got a 109 TimeformUS speed figure in that return, closing in this sloppy track. I am concerned a little bit that there's not enough pace for him. He generally drops back a bit, makes that late run. But if he does get some pace, any improvement off that first start off the bench is going to put him right there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a concern for a lot of horses in this race. I mean, you've got just deep closers like Limonite and Casanova, who you just mentioned, even the number 10, Sunny Smack, who I think is the morning line favorite in here. He's one who doesn't have a ton of early speed, and they're going to be really dependent on the pace of this race because we talked about it a little bit with Hunk of Burning Love. I just don't see that much of it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if those horses can make those late runs into the race. I'm a little skeptical, and I'd want prices on those horses. Others that are going to take money, like the number 5, Popular Kid, I think he's really stepping up in class. I was a little bit against him. The number 6, Exulting, I mean, he's coming out of a tougher spot in the Razorback, but all of his good speed figures recently have been earned on the turf. That's really what Mike Maker, I think, claimed him to do, to become a turf horse. And now he's coming back to the dirt, sort of seemingly as a last resort. So I don't know. I didn't totally trust him, though I guess he can win the race. One other horse that I want to mention that's just going to be a gigantic price in this race is the number 11, Alcatam. He is 30-1 in the morning line. I don't know if we'll get that high of a price, but I know he looks like he's badly off form, and he probably is. But this is a horse that is bred to go longer. When he was in Chad Brown's barn at the start of his career, he was targeted at longer races. He debuted going a mile at Belmont back in October of his 2-year-old season. He ran in the Remsen as a maiden. So obviously Chad Brown thought this is a horse that wants to run all day, thinking maybe this is going to be a Derby horse eventually. None of that panned out for him. But I don't understand why his current connections just seem so fixated on running him in these sprint races, because he hasn't had that many opportunities to go longer. I mean, 2 of the top 5 times that he's gone in route races have been graded stakes races, the Remsen and the Stephen Foster. He actually ran well going a 1-turn mile at Churchill Downs back in May of last year, earning a speed figure that, puts him somewhere in the mix here, a 114. And recently he's just been in these 6 furlong races. I think that's too short for him. He's stretching out now, and he's going to be a gigantic price in this race. He's probably going to have a bit more tactical speed on the stretch out. So we'll see what we get for him. He's just one that I want to mention at a big price.
The only thing I want to add to this race is, since we talked about value early on, I don't think there's any way we're getting 15-1 on Hunk of Burning Love. But he's a horse I would expect to be in the 8 to 10-1 range. So anything like that is something I'm going to take.
Let's move on to a couple of races from Gulfstream Park. We're going to talk about 2 allowance races there, the 11th and the 12th. And we'll start with the 11th, which is a turf allowance, so going a mile and a 16th. And this one is pretty wide open. I imagine the favorite's going to be the number 10 Battle of Blenheim, who's searching for his 3rd consecutive win for Mike Maker, but he's dropping down in class. This is not a horse that they're handling with a ton of confidence, just kind of running him in these claiming races, even though he's kind of earning speed figures that would lead you to believe maybe they could tackle a tougher spot. So if you don't totally trust him, there are a lot of ways you can go, and it seems like a race where you might be able to shop around for a price.
It does. He's an interesting case, the favorite in here, Battle of Blenheim. He, he's a horse. He is dropping off of 2 wins. I think he was in for 50 last time. He's in for 35. But it's one I just don't know what to do with him, because I think you got to consider the circumstances. I'm curious just how much claiming's going on now. It's hard to say when horses don't have a lot of places to race these days. So I'm wondering if they're just trying to sneak one over. But that's at a short price. He's not one that I think is one I'd want to be too confident in. I looked through the field. The Sublime Appeal looked good to me at first. He has a 108 TimeformUS speed figure, a 112 the time before that. But when I went and watched the replay of his last race, he absolutely had just a perfect trip sitting on the rail behind the speed duel. All our fractions are highlighted in red. He tipped out, and he just didn't have any finish. And that seems to be a theme with him on turf. So even over a course that's generally pretty speed favoring, I'm not too excited about him. He's ridden by Rajiv Mirage, who I know he's a longtime jockey, but riding on turf, it's just not his strong suit. So that's one I kind of went away from. So I actually wound up looking at a couple of others in here. The first one is Honey Won't, the 11 horse. He's drawn kind of far outside, but I like that the horse has some tactical speed. He set a slow pace last time, winning off easily in his trip down south from Aqueduct to his first start at Gulfstream. But I don't think he's by any means a horse who has to have the lead. I think he's a horse who can get good position and make a run late. So he's the one I started with in here. I'm curious where you went. Like you said, it is a wide open field, but that's the one I landed on top.
Yeah, just to kind of tie a knot on Battle of Blenheim for a second. He obviously is going to be tough if he runs his A race, because he's just run a bunch of speed figures that make him a little bit faster than most of the other horses in this race. It's just he's with Mike Maker now, but he's been in good barns before. He was with Todd Pletcher. He was with Chad Brown. Just barns that already have gotten the best out of him, and he's been in these lower level claiming races these mid-level claiming races for a while. I think he was a vet scratch recently back in February. You can see that in the TimeformUS PPs. He's a horse that's always been a little hard to keep on the racetrack. I wasn't visually impressed by his last race. He's just a favorite that I think is a little bit shaky. And that's why I too want to look at some alternatives. I actually don't like the horse that you mentioned at all, Honey Won't. I thought he got a perfect trip last time, setting a slow pace, and I just don't think his prior form is nearly good enough to give him a shot. He wasn't for me, but there are others in this race that I think are pretty interesting. Mike Maker's other horse, the number 12 Hieroglyphics, he makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, some people might be a little turned off by the fact that Louis Assayas is named on Battle of Blenheim and Lionel Reyes is named on Hieroglyphics. I'm not going to read too much into that. But because Hieroglyphics, he's run speed figures. I mean, just going back to when he was in Kieran McLaughlin's barn last fall, that put him pretty much on par with Battle of Blenheim. I mean, he wasn't that far behind Tusk, who's turned into a really good horse back in October, came back with an impressive victory at Aqueduct after that. I know that he didn't run that well last time for Teresa Pompey, but he's been claimed by Mike Maker out of that race, and that's really all you need to hear about these turf horses most of the time. There are some bigger prices, though, that interest me a little bit. If there is pace in this race, I mean, maybe a horse like Conviction Trade can be more effective because he's coming out of some pretty tough nominators of one race behind horses like Largent and Psyoff. There are not promising up-and-comers like that in this race, so I think Conviction Trade might be getting that little bit of class relief that he needs. He does need pace to close into because he's not a horse with a big turn of foot, but if it falls apart, maybe he's a horse that could come running late. The horse, though, that really interests me at what should be a pretty big price is the number 5 Blue Ridge Mountain. He's making his turf debut in this race, and just looking at his pedigree, he's supposed to really move up on the turf. His dam Snow Cone was a turf specialist. All 4 of her career victories were earned on the turf. She was a stakes winner on the turf. I think she ran buyers in the high 80s, low 90s, so she was a good turf horse. Hasn't been much of a broodmare yet, but I'm not too concerned about that because she hasn't produced that many foals. I think of the ones that she's produced, they've shown an affinity for turf and synthetic. And Blue Ridge Mountain, I know he's got to get a lot faster to be competitive with this field, but he's going out for connections that are not going to get bet. He's been working well on the turf recently. I saw Tyler Gaffalione was originally listed on this horse. Now it's Victor LeBron. So for me, that's even better because he's not going to just take money because he's got a live rider listed. So he's a big price that I do not want to let slip through the cracks in this race. So I would focus on him, a little bit of Conviction Trade and Hieroglyphics.
Yeah, Blue Ridge Mountain's the kind of reason I cut myself off after one horse. I had a feeling you were going to mention him, so I didn't want to always be the guy to steal the thunder. And you're more a breeding guy than me, but I saw much the same things as you did. At a big price, I don't know if he'll be 30 to 1, but he probably will be at least 20, and he does have that look of a long shot. He's a horse I definitely want to have on my tickets as well.
Let's move on to talk about that other allowance race, the 12th at Gulfstream on Saturday. And this one maybe seems a little bit more straightforward if you're going to go with the favorite, who I would imagine is going to be the number 9 Pacific Gale. Actually, she's not the favorite on the morning line. The number 2 JP's Delight is. We'll see how they actually bet the race. But Pacific Gale, just if she gets back to her good race from last season, she's going to win this race because she was running some speed figures behind horses like Separation of Powers, Heaven Has My Nikki, Come Dancing, that just make her too tough for these. The question is the layoff, and can she get back into top form?
Yeah, she's going to be the favorite. I don't think there's much doubt about that. If she's not, there's something wrong, and I would consider her cold on the board. I think that morning line's a bit off. The one thing I looked at it with her, she is coming off of that long layoff, but she did win first time out for this same trainer. I kind of consider that the ultimate long layoff. Horses who can win first time out have already proven they can win off a layoff, and so I don't think there's any real negative there with her on the layoff other than, where has she been? Was there a reason she laid off or not? If she is that 7-2 morning line, I would say take it. I do think she's the horse to beat, but there are a couple more I'm interested in here. Aerosol, who is consistent, in good form, looks like she's going to get a nice setup. We do have her predicted to be a fast pace. I don't have any problem with that. There's some real speed horses in here, and the 4 Eliza Star, the 8 Jakarta are both horses who like to go right to the front sprinting. So I do think there'll be some pace in here for a horse like Aerosol to close into. She's in really good form as a 5-year-old mare. She's running as good as she ever has. So she was one I liked. And then another I like to, I think has more dirtied up form, is the 3-horse Molto Bella. I actually think I picked her, if I remember right, in the Rampart where she just didn't run well at all. But I think her last race is better than look. She got a 103 TimeformUS speed figure, kind of chasing the really speedy Ladies Island around the track at Tampa. She's run speed figures that can compete with the rest of these. So while I do think Pacific Gale is probably the horse you want and the one to beat, those are the other 2 that I would prefer much more than the morning line favorite JP's Delight.
Yeah, talking about value with shorter prices. I mean, personally, I thought Pacific Gal was supposed to be like 8-5 in this race, and anything more than that to me is probably a good price on her, because I don't think people should overlook the fact that she is just significantly more classy than this field. And John Kimmel doesn't have the greatest numbers off layouts, but like you said, she's run well fresh before, and she appears to be working well into this race. I just think she's way the horse to beat. And JP's Delight, I think, is the one that you really have to talk about with relation to the pace, because she's run some of her best races when she's up close to pretty slow paces in sprint races. And now she's got some real speed horses to deal with, like Liza Starr and especially Jakarta on the outside. So it feels like JP's Delight is not getting the lead here. And it's unclear how she's going to handle having to come from a little bit off the pace, because she was cooked in a fast pace in the inside information two back. So I think there are some reasons to be concerned about her at a short price. Look, I mean, I'm not going to knock your horse at a price, the 3 Molto Bella. There are some things to like about her with regard to the pace of this race. I was actually a little bit interested in Ian Wilkes' other horse, the number 1 Princess Causeway. She ran really well on that optional claiming win 2 back at Churchill Downs when she beat Whoa Nelly, who's come back to do some good things since then. She was just in too tough in the Fall City last time. There is a question about whether 6 furlongs is just too short for a horse like her, but maybe she actually wants to go a little bit shorter. She just hasn't really done it that much in her career since early on. That 7 furlong race 2 back suggests that maybe going longer is not the answer for her. Maybe that she does want to go shorter. So I would give a look to her, but I think both of Ian Wilkes' horses are a little bit interesting as late runners in this race. And I would probably just go with Pacific Gale and try to get some price horses in underneath her.
Yeah, as you mentioned, my only concern with Princess Causeway was the distance. I thought it had the feel of more of a prep race for her. Maybe it is a turn back trying something new, but I'd probably look elsewhere, as I said. But we're on the same page. If Pacific Gale is close to top form, she's going to win this race.
Well, that's all the racing we're going to discuss on this week's TimeformUS Forecast. We'll probably recap some of Oaklawn's card on Tuesday on a Pacecast. We'll talk about that a little bit and see, how many really noteworthy performances take place this weekend, because it is a pretty good card and there might be some things to talk about even outside of the stakes races. So we'll assess that and see how many podcasts we're going to do next week. But we'll continue to do these handicapping shows because the racing's been strong around the country, even without stakes racing at a lot of places. There are some strong fields being assembled with barns shipping in from other venues. So we'll continue to talk about that as long as it's going on. Craig, always good to talk about these races with you. Remember, you can always listen to us on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back at you with more podcast action next week.